Okay, good.
It says the recorder has stopped on my end. There you go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another For Restorers Only webinar, Finding the Profits Hidden in Plain Sight. We're going to give it about 2 more minutes before we get started. Thank you very much for joining us today. So just sit tight and we'll be with you in less than 2 minutes.
Diane from Idaho is in the room. How's it going, Diane? That's awesome.
Ellensburg, Washington. I'm going to guess that that's Clean Image Services.
That's Canada.
Hey, Rob.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's international.
Absolutely. Oh, no doubt about it, eh? The Canadians showed up.
Hello, Michael from Fort Wayne. Good to see you. Yeah, you Canadians are everywhere. All right, it's 12:01, so why don't we get started? Thank you guys for being on time. I don't want to penalize you. Really appreciate you being here today. I'm really excited about what we're going to be doing today because all of us in the restoration industry are facing incredible challenges in terms of downward pressure on pricing and margins from the insurance carriers. And so really thinking about ways to improve our estimating, our scoping, our documentation, our internal operations are really, really important for all of us in order to maximize the profits that are available. And so I've asked Kris to join us today. He's been working with some of my clients and really providing some very, very important and eye-opening information. And I said, man, we've got to bring this to a broader audience, Kris. And so for those of you that don't know him, Kris is the vice president at Encircle, a really unique software company that is doing some amazing things in the restoration business. If you are not familiar with Encircle, I highly recommend that you learn more about them, and we'll give you some opportunities to do that at the end of the webinar today. But Kris, I think, is really one of the preeminent experts in terms of estimating in the restoration industry. He's a certified restorer, and if I had this right, I think your dissertation was on estimating to get your CR, and has been a speaker, a published author, does all kinds of great restoration-related content. And so Kris's knowledge, the systems he understands, the processes have helped thousands of restorers to increase profits substantially, be better able to defend and get their pricing, and improve communications and operational efficiencies overall. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Kris.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks Tim for hosting this. It's really exciting when you get to go through a webinar like this, and if you haven't seen my webinars before, I instead of just talking to bullet points, I try to take you on a journey and put it into real world terms so that you can see what we're putting in place and how it actually works within a business, because there's so many factors that will actually impact how you're able to apply this to your current business or where you're going to be in the future. And really it comes down to the dynamics of your local adjusting market or the type of book of business you're running. And so we want to make sure that you get a good understanding of a bunch of these concepts and how they work. And I'm going to do something a little different today. Tim's provided a safer environment where I normally present, where it's a very public space. I'm gonna actually roll back some of my books and show you how the result of what I've put in place in my personal business, what it did, and I'm gonna do that at the end to kind of strengthen the lessons that we're teaching today. For this webinar, it's not just about sharing some of that what happens, but it's getting an understanding of why profitability suffers within a company and where it's dropping. So I've had a chance over the last 15 years, but more so over the last 10 years, to work with carriers, TPAs, independent adjusters, and contractors. And when you see the behind the curtains of each business, you really get to understand what's going on and how those businesses are using the systems to their advantage, and also how they're misusing it, either just by coincidence or actually by structure. And what we found is most times it's just by coincidence. It's a lack of knowledge, which then creates a bunch of troubles in the restoration business. So we're going to talk about that journey of finding the hidden profits today, and we're going to go through some of the common troubles that come with that. And I'm going to flip up my screen here so you guys can see the presentation as we go through it. And what we're going to talk about is basically the basis for all estimates. And we're going to start on understanding where the risks are and how it's going to impact your business. And then from there, we're going to go into some of the hidden dangers that will affect your profitability, especially if you're not aware of them. They're really going to affect your profitability. At any point, Tim and Fred are going to be managing the question and answers. If you guys got questions, fire them in. We're going to try keeping this within the hour. But if you guys have a lot of questions, and by the end of the webinar, we will absolutely get to them. I've already allotted some time in my schedule. I'll stick around and answer whatever you have for as long as you have it. So we'll get your questions answered today. I'm going to start this off. I'm going to ask if we want to do a quick survey here. And what I want to do is throw up this the ability to that's the benefits of doing a live webinar. Your power sometimes goes out. So hopefully you guys can hear me. Tim, can you just confirm you got me back on speaker? Awesome. Thanks, guys. So here's the results of the poll. And proprietary systems using your own magic sauce is there. We're going to show you share the results here. When you look at this, there is rate material is a fairly safe system. People came back doing your own cubic foot, square foot, digital estimating, not so scary. Bid or flat rate proprietary systems is where the biggest risk is. Actually, the biggest risk of all the systems is your digital estimating system. And I'm going to show you why. We don't normally take it that way, that that we're coming back into the environment where the unit price is going to impact you. So I'm going to just click this off and we'll get back to the presentation. Unfortunately, I just got to refire that up. And there we go. All right. So when you start to look at this and you start looking at the systems, the two most dangerous ones, as I said, is unit pricing. And where I didn't expect that either. I thought unit pricing was pretty safe. You get a unit price, you put it in, you do the work. But here's what we didn't realize at the time. And I actually worked for a large restoration company out in the West Coast. And at the time I was running a $40 million branch, and our profitability was tanking. We were actually going down the wrong way. Every time we did an Xactimate estimate or a unit price estimate, our margins seemed to be lower. So we would bid jobs out. We'd come in with a certain number. We would do time and material. We would come in and hit our target margins. And then all of a sudden we got into the business and we were really driving, why did we write a job that was similar and exact? And then all of a sudden we take a profitability or a margin hit. And it was substantial enough because most of our business was rolling into that at the time. And so we started to look at what other benchmarks of profitability are there and what it was impacting this. We broke down the nuts and bolts of the systems. And what was shocking is that the way we were calculating the scope and the way we were building our scopes was actually leading us to bleed money and cash out at an alarming rate. So my branch was a $40 million branch. I serviced two other branches that was about another $20 million. So when you miss a target by 10 or 15% in a month, you're giving up $500,000 of cash. And so this was a priority one for us to figure out in that region. And I ended up going and taking a bunch of Xactimate classes and basically went to the instructor, said, hey, where would I find the profits on this? And he's like, you just use the system the way you use it and you'll figure it out. There was nobody focused on helping the restorer get the profitability part figured out. You can click buttons all day long, but if you couldn't understand how that was built, you're going to have a hard time really turning that into actionable insights that or actionable actions that you can turn in and generate revenue from. So what we started to do is we started to look at where was our profitability. Now, in any business, you're going to have a overhead cost within that business. You're going to have to hit that. That's your minimum target. And technically, you're going to run into whatever your overheads are is your break even, but you have to factor in earnings, depreciation, taxes, interest. So there's an extra burden on top of that business that you don't get to see until the end of the year when you hit the scorecard and you get to tally up that EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That will erode your profits. So it depends on how you and your accountant talk. I like to talk net profit. Some accountants like to talk EBITDA, and I'll show you some of the issues with an EBITDA discussion. If you're in here and you have an EBITDA discussion, your profitability target has to include anywhere between 3 and 4 to 6 or 7% additional revenue that you're going to have to earn to pay that EBITDA number off. So that's why we look at net profit and then factor that EBITDA account into your variable costs. Now, there's a lot of accounting talk, and I'm not going to go deep into that. And I just see here, I don't know if the guys are frozen on their side, but are you talking about what's included in line item plus yield and how line items are different labor rates? And yeah, I'm going to get into that because part of that is what's included in it. Part of it is based on line items. But when you look at the profitability of a business, it really stems down to the granular level of what makes up an estimate. It's a bunch of line items or it's a bunch of tasks in a business. And then how do those tasks within the business get tallied up into the job? And then how do those jobs end up into a month, and that month ends up to a year? So it really comes down to how are you billing? And what you'll find is if you're conscious and your estimators are conscious of the costs, then you can start focusing on how are we exceeding those costs and how are we getting our company into a profitable range. When we look here, if the red line represents the break even and the black line's representing the EBITDA break even line, it means for you to incur a profit, you have to exceed it. Now, if you guys follow Tim and you guys are watching with him, you're actually looking at Mike Michalowicz's Profit First. If you follow that, any part of that, where he's an author who writes a lot of books, but if you follow any part of that, you'll know that you're actually taking your profit out first, and then you worry about all your costs and do the accounting. We don't normally do that in restoration. Normally we come in and we figure out our cost, we take out the taxes, and whatever's left we keep. But you have to factor that in to where are you going to be on your estimate. So Mike Michalowicz, if you haven't read his book, get the Profit First book. It's an amazing book, talks about reorganizing your accounting. I'll tell you, it's a game changer. When I read his book, it actually made a lot of changes in my business for that. And I've had the chance to meet with him and talk with him. And it's a really astonishing view on how to look at your business. And here's why it's important. If you set a profitability target, and in this case, we'll say it's 11% or 12%, somewhere around there. If you've got EBITDA that's eroding half of that, then you're really only putting a 6% bottom line to the good at the end of the year. But your accounting is going to say, hey, you did 12%. You're going to take 6% away. And depending how your accounting has gone over the years, if they made some adjustments on one year and it cost you on another year, you're going to have to figure that out, and it will impact your overall profitability. There's another goal that you want to set. And this is where your project managers are really aggressive, and they're trying to get that extra margin on top. So it's a 15, maybe 20% EBITDA or 20% net, which is where you want to be, depending on how you guys are measuring your EBITDA or your accounting EBITDA or net profit. Whatever that number is, the project managers that hit that number should be rewarded heavily, and those are the people you want to keep within your business, because if someone can hit a low goal and you have other people that are hitting the break-even points, don't even do the break-even work. You're just churning work to churn work. And so that principle is where you're going to see it come into how your estimating system unfolds. Now, I see we have some questions here, and I'm just going to touch base with Tim quickly to see if he's not frozen up. And in here, oh, perfect. Thanks, Tim. And in here, we have a few questions. I'm going to get to these questions about how do you defend your line items in a little bit. And I'll talk to you why we're going to use that when we actually deal with the adjusters and how we're going to do it. So I wrote an article, and it was part of, Tim mentioned it was part of my water loss specialist education journey. You have to write a research paper, and it has to be peer reviewed. And if it's good enough, it gets published. And in this case, I wrote a comparison of time and materials and unit cost pricing models for water loss. But really what I did is I actually took it and broke it down and said, here's why you need to understand time and materials. And we actually look at it, and in the RIA, they actually call it rate and material. And the reason why is we're not worried about time. We're worried about negotiating the rate, negotiating the equipment rental rates, and negotiating the material rates and what markups we have on there. So if you've talked time and materials, you might say, well, that's an old model. But everything that we do in business is based on the fact that you have to understand your time and materials and your rate and materials and how you charge for things and how much time it takes to do stuff in order for you to do any of the other systems. When you look at how big of a discussion this is for our industry, a lot of people got away from being able to compare estimating on time versus actuals. A lot of people don't do that self-check, that hard talk at the end of a job and say, how good was I at estimating? Because what happens is we just enter line items in, and then all of a sudden, whatever the price is, that's the price we're going to do the job for, because we're not using those systems to their full potential. And so understanding how rate and material is built, and for your estimators to really understand that, will give you the foundation that you need to be able to write a really solid Xactimate estimate. And what you'll find is it usually ends up that the senior project managers or the senior estimators that were in the business when rate and material was around more prevalently are better estimators. And then the younger estimators, although really good on computers, may not have a full understanding of how the numbers get there. Now, that's a general stereotype that is out there, but that's typically what I see, is that the systems are too much of a crutch and you haven't learned the foundations of how to properly estimate a job. So although it might work in some price lists, it doesn't work all the time. And that's when you get red flagged. If you know materials and you know your rate material methodology, nothing's going to hamper your profitability more than when you lose control of an estimating system. And when you're in control of a job and you understand if you're going to make money, you don't take jobs that you think you're going to lose dollars on. You might as well just hand those jobs back in. If you can't make dollars on it, why are you doing the work? Now, this is where program work, it really is changed the way people think about the industry. Is we take a lot of program work and a lot of volume in exchange for margin. And a lot of the times, if those jobs come in at low margin or no margin, we take it because we want the next job. And you're going to hit a home run on one of these jobs is the mentality of it. If you look back a few years, there was times when we would turn jobs away, and we'd turn them away regularly because the adjuster didn't want to pay the amount. Someone else was willing to do it for less, and you let those jobs go. And there's a strategy in some marketplaces and by some restorers that will actually give those low margin jobs to the competitor just to keep them busy while they bleed out cash, and they only take the gravy and they stay smaller and nimbler. And it's proven to be an effective way of making money depending on how you build your business. Now, everything that you do is based on knowing the price of your goods and the labor costs and materials. And it kind of goes without saying, except for when you start to look at the different systems. So when we look at unit pricing, square foot pricing is where you can get really aggressive with this. And the square foot pricing I'm talking about is where you say, you know what, when I walk into a building, I'm going to cut drywall at 2 feet, remove carpet, remove the baseboard, and I'm going to do an extraction of the floor. And I'm going to do that for, say, $7 a square foot. And then if there's a category 3, I think I charge $12 a square foot for it. And if I have to rent my scrubbers and my air movers and dehumidifiers, I'm going to charge a flat $6 a square foot to dry the building. That 6 feet comes with a 5-day cap. And every day that I do stabilization is $1 a day for dehumidifying the air, just to stabilize the environment. Now, a lot of restorers don't talk that way until you get to the commercial size of the job. But I'll tell you, in a private world, when you're not on program work, you can play any type of estimating model you want. You just have to know how your costs are built, and you have to know the assumptions that go with it. So when we talk square foot and cubic foot pricing, no one tells you that you can charge. You can't charge that way. You can't assemble a bunch of groups together. You make a bunch of assumptions based on your experience on time and what you think it's going to cost you, and then you put a price forward. And that becomes part of the art of estimating in any model you want. So you're not, in this industry, insurance carriers will tell you that you're locked into a certain model of estimating, but the reality is the legal world says you're not. You're allowed to come up with a proprietary price and do that. Now, when you get into unit pricing systems like Exact, Symbility, and SimSol, in there, you actually are coming in where you are running within those systems. You actually are playing within a set of rules. Now, those rules are actually not, again, they're an artificial set of rules, because if you read the user agreement in Xactimate, it says that at no point should the user, the contractor, be restricted to the price list per month. It's basically saying you need to be able to change your prices, and the whole system was built so you can change. And as I think it was Michael was talking about, you can change the labor rates, you can change the production rates in the program, but in the current environment, that might not be applicable, because you may have signed an agreement saying, no, we'll just use the rates that are coming out. It's dangerous. That's actually the most dangerous thing you can do, because you basically have said, no matter what job I'm handed, I can only charge this amount of money. And so then when we looked at fixed pricing and lump sum pricing, basically the same thing, you're still in control at that point. You're submitting a bid. You're back in control like you were if you were doing square foot and cubic foot pricing. You have that flexibility to put those numbers forward, put in a fudge factor, put in a number for someone who is tougher insured to deal with, or tougher customer. You get to price for that job. And then you have value pricing, which is a little harder to do in restoration unless you're doing some of the other services like carpet repair, carpet color repair, where the cost of replacing that carpet is 10 grand. But if you come in and you fix that stain in the floor, or repair that hole in the floor, you can actually then charge something like $1,000 for what normally would take an hour of work. The value to the homeowner is $1,000. We don't do a lot of that in restoration, although you can get into some models where you can start doing value pricing, and we might get into that later on in this presentation. So it's important, and I come back to say, when you look at rate and material, and I don't want to make any assumptions, when we're looking at rates and materials, you're looking at what is the rates of your staff. So what is your cost? What is your charge out? Not what does Xactimate tell you that your rates are. It's what is your cost? What is your profitability targets? How much do you need to make per man hour? How much of the job is going to be materials? And what is the contractual obligation you have to mark up materials? Because if in one job you have a 10 and 10, just overhead and profit, and you're only going to get the 16.67% margin, you have to build in the additional margin in your labor rate. If you have a job where you're allowed to put in 15% plus overhead and profit, you have to build in a lesser margin into that labor rate to offset those materials. So when you start to look at where are you building your price list, it's on every job, every negotiation is you're looking to see if the price is going to achieve the margin that you need to keep your doors open. And on average, I was just on a call not long ago, the average overheads is not 16%. It's on the low side, 19, on the high side, 42. What we're seeing most companies run in is between that 30 and 34%. So if you're coming in at 30% or 34% and your margin on materials is only 16, you're going to have to make up the difference on your staff. Now, volume does play a little factor. If you grow your business quick with the same resources, your overheads will proportionately drop, but not to the level, and that's kind of a gamble. You want to be able to say, I'm basing it on my margins and my overheads now, and if I do a bigger volume, I'm going to make more money, and that's how most businesses will operate and run. Then you talk about vehicles. In unit pricing, and let's say in exact and stability, the only vehicles there are in content. But if you do time and material, you can charge vehicles, and typically it's in the contract for vehicle rentals and vehicles on site. So there's no rules other than Exact came up with rules and they factored in vehicles into some of the line items, or they didn't. But on time and materials, you're factoring in how many trucks am I going to put on site? What am I doing? Now, in a pure time and material or rate material environment, you're coming up with a negotiation and then you're tallying it up. However, if you get into a do not exceed or a magnitude, we call it a rough order of magnitude, if you get into that situation where you have to give a number, you have to, in your head, calculate it out or put it into a spreadsheet and factor in what you think the costs are going to be to say our rough order of magnitude on this job is about $1 million. We don't think it's going to go higher than 1.2, and we expect it to come in around 900. That's all based on time and material. That's all based on taking the rates, how much time you're going to burn, what material and equipment you have on site, and how long you think the job is going to take, and then based on a certain scope of work. And if you get all that right, then you can get into what is the right charge to get your margin. And once you factor that in, you actually are now feeling comfortable taking on those jobs. So I say master rate and materials, and the reason why is if you have an estimator that understands how each factor within your business is built out, you're going to really understand where you need to focus your estimating abilities on. And estimators that know intuitively that they can't do work for a certain dollar amount are going to make some major changes to their estimates or not take the work. And one of our estimators that we saw in the past actually was turning away about 30% of the work that was low margin, unprofitable work, and just said we were not taking it. That company's profitability dramatically went up. And it's counterintuitive. Well, if we do $10 million, we should make money. If you do $8 million and you're doing it at a very low margin, you can make the same money on a $2 million business at a higher margin, and you don't take all the risk. And so we're going to focus on how do you get your estimating systems and how do you get your unit pricing into that model. Now, when we look at rates, and I'm going to get to those questions. I'm going to get to the questions here if we've got them. I'm going to just go through a couple more slides, and then we'll answer some questions here. So if we look at the rate part, this is where you're going to break it down. And what we don't typically do is we don't typically do that when we do an Xactimate estimate. We don't look at how do we build up our rates. How many hours in a year are non-billable that are factored into the business? And in my businesses, it was somewhere around 10% of our hours were non-billable. Who pays those wages? Is it a cost of doing business? Is it an overhead? Or is it part of that hourly rate? And what's interesting is, if you said it's a cost of doing business, is not billable to a job, then that cost has to be moved over and factored into your rate, because that's your rate includes everything built in that's a cost of doing business. So if it's not charged out, it has to be built into the hourly rate. That's how it becomes part of that cost of doing business. So when you see this with overhead and profit, the discussion is you have overhead and profit. Oh, that charge, we don't pay for that charge. It's part of that overhead and profit. If that's true, then you would have to take that charge, factor it in. How many jobs in the year do you pay that out? Factor it in, and all the hourly rates would go up by 10 cents or 15 cents. That's how you factor it in. So it actually, in order for that to be a true statement, it doesn't just get pulled off the books. You actually have to build it back into the business number. And that's the difference between the insurance industry and the restorers of how we look at numbers right now, is it actually has to be built back in. So when we look at who's doing the work, this kind of gets back to one of the questions was, who's doing the work on the job site? Is it a demo laborer? Is it a plumber? Is it a carpenter? Is the carpenter actually doing their own work? Is it a roofer doing their own work? And then what makes up all of those overheads of that hourly rate? Is it include uniforms and training? Who pays the off time when that technician has to go and get trained? Does it include holiday time and vacation time? All of this has to be factored in, because if your company comes in and you want to compete in a tight market where there's a labor force, and you said, you know what, most companies offer 2 weeks vacation, we want to offer 4. You can't offer 4 unless you factor it into your hourly rate. And that's why you should see in the market different hourly rates, because different employers will compete differently. And if you're stronger at marketing your business, you might be charging a higher rate so that you can retain a different type of caliber of staff. That's all why you would see in a normal business like your subtrades, those rates are totally different between one subtrade to another. You get one plumber at $110 an hour and another one at $140. What's the difference? It might be the caliber of their staff, or it might be the way they're running their business, or the profitability of that business. It's all based on how are they building their price. In our business, we haven't spent as much time focusing on that. And then when we look at materials, you have to look at every time you do a material takeoff, what is the quality of the material? Are we dealing with a lower end material, a high end material? What's the quantity? How much do we need? Is there any of these materials special order? If we have a small job, do we have a lot of waste? You have to factor in the different wastes into the job. You have to look at preparation. Are we preparing that baseboard on site with paint, or do we have to bring it to the shop? So we have to pick it up, bring it to the shop, paint it, wrap it, take it to the site, and install it. That's much more different than if we were working in a new home and we're painting baseboard on site. If you're spraying the finish on a cabinet, or you're doing cabinet repairs, it being done on site or being done back at the shop, that will totally change the cost on that. You could factor it in by hours, or you can factor it in within the system, but either way, it has to be accounted for. Then you got other things like delivery. Is it on-site delivery? Is it based on the fact that they assume your materials are in your warehouse? Very few restorers do that. So if we're delivering jobs or materials to a job site, is that accounted into it? Is it a delivery fee, or is it hours for our staff to pick up that material? And are we being accommodated for that? And are we being compensated for that? And these are all things that are going to then affect the price. And really, at the end of the day, that's what you're focused on is the price in your estimating systems right for the work you're doing? And so you might be using a different quality paint, a Benjamin Moore or high-end paint versus a Home Depot paint. Not that there's anything wrong with Home Depot, but if that price of a gallon comes at $40 and you're paying $80, did you adjust that quantity on the price? Because that's going to really impact your profitability when your materials are exceeding the budget you put in your job. And that's all those digital estimating systems are doing, is creating budgets. And you got to validate that the budgets are correct. So I'm going to flip over here to the question. So are you talking about the included item, line item plus yield and how those items differ. So what they're asking about is inside every line item, there's a production rate. And I'm going to get into more on that when we go into the unit pricing, but production rates are some of the things that you need to consider. Some of the other things is what do they assume is included in the price? And then what are you factoring in to that price as well? Because there's a lot of things that you have to look at. I don't care what they factor in as a stock program. You have to then factor in, is that actually applicable to what you're doing in the job site? How do you determine your true cost of overhead and profit, and how costs are determined? And that's a great question, because when you look at we'll preface this that everyone's accounting is slightly different. So it really is based on how you account for this in your business. And there's been goals to standardize the accounting across restoration to get the right chart of accounts set up. But the reality is, as long as you know what is variable, what you've deemed as a variable cost of goods sold versus a variable cost based on, the growth of your business versus fixed, it doesn't really matter to me how much is variable or fixed. But what I am looking at is, I want to know that my teams know that we have a target. So if our target, let's say our overheads is 25%, and then we have a tax overhead, which is part of that EBITDA, sort of tax amortization, I'll throw a number out. I'll say it's another 6. For our business to break even, we need to hit 31%. And then we have a profitability goal, and our profitability goal is 10. So for our business to make 10%, we have to hit 41%. If our team say that's unrealistic, then I have to cut costs, because I'm making 10%, regardless of what our company needs to do. I need to make 10%. I need to keep the doors open. We need profit to keep this business growing. So now we have to look at costs. How can we lower our costs? And there's 2 places you can lower costs: fixed cost or cost of goods sold. Those are the only 2 places you can start adjusting costs on there. And so you're going to have to factor that in. Can we reduce our cost of goods sold, or do we have to take it out of our overheads? Do we need smaller shop space? Do we use on our cost of goods sold? Do we use sub-trades instead of in-house? All you're focused on is, I need to generate profit. And every business that focuses on the profit and you put profit first, all of a sudden you start to look at it as, that's the blood of the business. Because if you have enough profit, you can do a lot of things within your business. And that kind of comes down to when you start to figure out, where do costs fall? And that's one of those ones, those are hard costs without your overhead. I'm looking at the overhead as my staff, my project managers. Now, if you read Xactimate, those should be charged out, but most insurance companies say you can't. Yet if you do a time and material large loss job, project managers are charged out. The administrators for that particular job are charged out. Small tools are typically charged out at a percentage. The way we charge the jobs are 2 different ways. You have to build a lot more hourly rate into your Xactimate numbers in order to offset what you would normally be compensated for on a time and material job. The rules are different, but that's because the systems have been manipulated to be a little bit different. I don't think by design. I think it's just by the way it is if I say, you're going to accept $1 million of my work and you can't charge me for 5 line items, that's like asking for a discount. I don't have a problem with that. But where I do have a problem is when those rules are really put onto a contractor, but they don't apply to every job. And insurance companies look at it a little different as well. They have 100,000 or 1 million claims a year, and they're playing a law of averages, saying, well, if we take this 1 line item off every job, we save some money. The reality is, you don't have that volume to make it up. You only have 100 or 200 or 1,000 jobs a year. You have to make money on all 1,000. You can't spread it out over 1 million jobs and have some real stinkers in there. You have to spread that out over 1,000 jobs. You just don't have the room to give margin away that often. And if your company is smaller, like 100 or 200 job company, you really don't have the ability to just throw money out the window. There's just not the margin in the businesses anymore to do that. So I talk about the hidden dangers here, and it's kind of probably an overused cliche, but it fits this discussion pretty adequately. The highest risk estimating system that you use is the digital estimating system. And it's because you can't control all the factors. You can't factor in all the liability and all the risk and compensate yourself for the reward when you're coloring inside those lines. you're given a price list. You might be able to add some extra hours, but you can't change a lot in those price lists without getting a lot of pushback. You're going to be under reviews for TPA, so you might have TPA agreements. And listen, if you sign an agreement with a carrier, a contractor, a TPA, that's a deal you made. You did the weighted valuation and said, I need that work and I'm willing to trade margin for volume. That you can't complain about. It's when you're not in a relationship with an insurance company and you've set your own rates and they push back on it. That's where you do have some grounds to argue, and I stand behind you. But if you're one of the people that signed for a TPA and then complain about the price you're getting, that's the deal you accepted, and they will continue to give those deals away as long as people keep signing the contracts. So it's on us as restorers. If you don't like what you see, don't sign the deal, but don't complain about it after you sign. And the reason why is you're getting into these big volume pushes where your business is running really fast. It actually runs a lot faster. And it's funny, Nelson's on the call. Nelson and I came sort of from the same roots in Canada about 15 years ago when we met. But in Canada, a lot of carriers, about 90% of everyone's work is program work. If you choose to go down that program route, you can't complain. You could go do private work, but in Canada, it's a lot different than the US. A lot of restorers and most of the industry is built on program work. So you have to play within those rules, and you're going to make less margin on a job, but you probably make it up on volume. If you're in the US and you're playing a game, there's a lot less opportunity to be on those programs. But for you to go out and do private work, it's actually a better opportunity for you to take control of your business, and it's easier for you to take control of your business. And I say that knowing that the word easy and talking to adjusters about price is not the same thing. But what I'm saying is you have the ability to control that. And if you build a price model that works for you, you'll have the ability to then know when you're going to slip on some really solid surfaces. A little bit like when you're going in and designing your own price list, you know where the risks are in your business. You know what your costs are. You need to be able to price for that. So when we talk about how are you building it in, then we're going to start talking about production rate. And this was the question that was asked earlier, is what is production rate? And the biggest risk with any estimating system, whether you design it or you're playing within an Xactimate Symbility environment, is you don't control the rules. And if you can't control the estimating system to account for the differences, you really are stuck in the opportunity to lose money. Very rare is it that you're going to make money. So a production rate or a yield talks about how much time or how much material or how much wasted time or how much wasted material is factored into that. If you're not familiar with this in Xactimate yet, you're going to want to be, because what you're going to be doing is trying to tune down every part of the estimate and understand what assumptions did they make about the job, and are those assumptions right to what you're doing. Now, there's a lot of times when this fails, when you do a small job and you buy a gallon of paint for something that's a half gallon. You are only charging out a half gallon of paint. You're actually putting in a gallon on that job. Most likely you're leaving the gallon behind. You're compensated for half a gallon plus a little bit of waste, and you're eating half a gallon yourself. So you would have to make the adjustment on that price per can and adjust it to compensate for that waste, or compensate that waste factor to say 50% of that can is a waste. And that's just simple estimating. If you're doing time and material, you say, I'm charging you for one can of paint. I don't even care if I take one brush stroke out of it. I'm getting the full can of paint plus my markups. Then you get into the other thing that affects production rate. Now, this isn't necessarily what's affecting production rate in Exact, but you would do this if you're doing any other job. Degree of difficulty, the degree of risk, and those WTF moments where you're like, what am I going to do here? Or what is that customer doing? I'm going to charge a premium for a really bad customer. We used to do that. If you got a high maintenance client, the adjuster would be like, yeah, this person's a little nuts. You're going to have to factor that into your job, and you would charge a premium for it. Nowadays, we just say, oh, no, you get compensated flat across all jobs. So if you're that contractor that's the problem solver, you're going to get less money to do those types of problem solvings because you're playing on that flat rate base, and you don't get compensated for the hard jobs. You actually just want the easiest jobs possible in order to make this work. So here's the simple example is you're painting a wall, and painting a wall is painting a wall. But again, you have to look at different factors of painting a wall. How much time, how much material, how much waste. If we put these people next to it, they're still just painting a wall. But what factors are in there? Well, there's a degree of difficulty, there's a degree of risk, and there's a WTF moment right there when I see them sitting on a rope, no harnesses. You would say that's not the safest way to do it. But in exact, you're getting the same dollar a square foot to do the painting on here, but you haven't factored in all the differences. Now, when you do these side by side, it's an extreme example, but this is the reality of doing jobs in types of structures where what if you have lots of windows? What if you have a different outcrop or lots of things that are in your way? You might have lots of doors. You may have thermostats and wall lights and a bunch of things that are in your way. They're not the same work. So who's factoring in the inefficiencies for doing that? And it shouldn't be a big discussion when you're dealing with customers. It should be very easy to say, here's what you're doing, here's why I'm doing it, and here's why you're getting charged a premium. It's pretty common sense. And if you talk to your trades, you can't go to them and say, can you do this job for $500? You did the last job for $500. They're going to look at you and think you're silly because the job is more complex. Even though you're maybe doing less work, it's harder work. You're going to be charging a higher amount. And that's where the programs will lead you down the wrong path. That trade's going to raise its price. You're still charging the same amount. You can't get away from that. So if you use Symbility, use SimSol or Exact, it doesn't matter what you're doing. They actually factored in. So you can't really blame them for not having it there. It's the ecosystem that's not allowing you to do that. You'll look at how much more square footage can you paint, and then some carriers will say just add the hours in, or some will say make the adjustment. It's up to you to really get in and say this is 25% more difficult, and therefore we're going to change the efficiency by 25%. Most estimators that don't have that experience have a hard time communicating that, and then the adjusters on their sides sometimes are under program rules where they can't accept that. They may say, hey, I need you to put it in somewhere else. That's a dirty conversation because you're going to not be able to get the scope of work right. You're going to actually be doing something that could be reflected as illegal by doing something that you're not actually doing. But that's how you get to play in that's how you get to play within the market. Is you got to make those hard choices. Is that what you're willing to do? We didn't do that. I tried to stay as transparent as possible. And the only reason you would move it over is if you had adjusters like, listen, I really want to help you. I'm sending an email saying, as per our discussion, we're going to be charging you for this, even though we did that in the system. I want to be very clear that if someone ever reviewed my file later, this is the reason why I did it. And I think we'd be good if we did that. But the fact is the estimate says you're doing one thing and your guys actually did something else on a job site. Just got to be careful. If you look at painters, though, but look at any part of your job, you get into efficiencies. How about painting that wall where it's a bare wall and you have no contents around versus is there a lot of contents around? Are people living in that space? Do you have pets that you have to worry about? Does that space need to be under negative air? All those factors have to be factored into this, and they're not all line items. Line items won't take care of everything. You have to factor in that efficiency. So then we get into the workers' cost. I think the question was raised again is what about the cost of labor? So most people recognize this, but if you don't, that's fine too, is that inside Xactimate, every time you do a remove and replace, you get a skilled trade laborer who puts the item in, and you get a unskilled laborer taking the materials out. Now, we don't do demolition often with a sledgehammer and it's an unskilled removal of materials. Typically, we're doing a surgical removal of materials, cut and drywall up 2 feet. We're removing carpet. You're typically using a skilled laborer. You can change that in the system to reflect what you're doing and get that skilled efficiency versus of a trade versus a handyman. I want to get paid those wage costs and those benefits of my trade because a laborer or a temp laborer is not going to get the same benefits that I pay somebody who is part of my skilled team. And when you look at that, you got to look at the workers. You have a skilled trade worker who's in here doing real work. They have real wage costs and real benefits. I'm going to point this out to you because if you haven't seen this, this is where you're actually looking at, and I took Tim's hometown here, just picked one, but I know Tim's in Chicago. So if you look at it, if you had a skilled laborer doing finish work, if you have a finish carpenter doing work, it's $85 an hour. When they go to remove that material, it's $60. Right there, you're taking 28% hit on the charge out that you should have charged for that skilled laborer. If you did drywall in Chicago, all these other ones are showing you 30, 40, 50% reductions. If I have a plumber going to remove a toilet, I need to change that labor back to a plumber charge. I can't just have a demolition laborer doing it. What happens is you're blending those two together. So half the job is at 155 and the other half the job's at 60. You don't have the revenue to just hand out if your subtrade's charging you 155 on the entire job. And what you're doing is if you're getting some of those profitability transfers from Xactimate over, if you're getting some of that profitability transfer by blending the two together, you're probably getting hit with a lower margin on that. In here, the other thing that we want to look at is these hidden dangers, and this is the negotiations that happen at the time you sign a preferred program, and then the ones that happen after you've signed a preferred program. So nothing is more dangerous than having someone tell you how you're going to charge when they have no idea how you're going to cost something. So I've had adjusters say, we don't pay for emergency services. We don't pay for those emergency service callouts ever. We don't pay overtime. We don't pay travel. We don't pay for, you name your favorite non-billable service that they want for free. What you have to understand is every one of those will decimate your business. And if you don't recognize this, this is why unit pricing is the most dangerous pricing system in our industry. And it's the old adage that comes into play. A dollar saved is a dollar earned, and a dollar charged is 10 cents earned. That used to be true. It's actually not true anymore. What you have is you have a dollar saved is a dollar earned. That's still true. If you can put, you worry about your bottom line, you're going to protect it. A dollar charged on top of whatever scope of work you did is a dollar earned. If you were going to charge $1,000 for a job and you charged $1,100 because you found more missing line items, but for the work you were still going to do, that $100 flows to the bottom line. You already were going to incur that cost. You found profit by being better at your scope. And a dollar lost on your scope is a dollar out of your profits. When an adjuster takes an item off your estimate, they're taking that dollar out of your bottom line, and it's not coming off, we'll have some dollars pulled off. No, it's a dollar you're losing. So if your profits were 10, they're now 9. You lose that much profitability on it. There's no split on that. I want to make sure that you understand this, because this is a demonstration which I'm going to do. It's going to show you some simple things that you can do that have high margins. And that's because every action associated with a line item is fake. And the reason I say that it's not real, it might be real, but chances are it's not real. A job is based up on a series of line items that you put together. It creates a budget of costs and charge outs. Neither one of them may be real, and it doesn't matter. It's just you're getting to an aggregate number that you say that $10,000, how I built it up with line items, is either enough or not enough to hit my profit targets. That's not the right price. It's the price that the system gave you, and you have to determine, do I need more or less, or is that number good? We don't do that as estimators typically. So then what we do is we start looking at how do each line item affect our profitability proportionate to what we put in. And it's easier when you do a demonstration like detaching and resetting blinds. In a job, we talk about liability and profitability. In here, if I do a job like this, I remove 2 clips, and for every blind I take down in my market, it was somewhere around $35 a set of blinds. Now, the way I found this line item is I replaced a $2,000 set of blinds because we didn't take it down and the air mover buffled it up against a window. Here's what we have is if you detach and reset a set of blinds, you're going to use a screwdriver. This is about the breakdown that you're going to see. For 5 minutes of work, it's going to cost you $2. Your charge out is roughly $33. You have a $31 profit. Now, if you boiled that down and just said, all I'm doing is blinds, it's $372 per hour. Now, the reality is this is part of an overall job. There's other line items where you don't make any real profit, and this is just subsidizing it. These line items aren't perfect, and that's why I say you might be real and might not be real. In this case, there's a real profit to detaching blinds. What you just did, though, for your business is you lowered the liability, you increased your profitability, and it became part of your scope of work. Now, what's critical is you also reduce potentially other work you're going to do for free. Blinds carry a static charge, and they love to eat dust up. So if you go and start twirling around all that dust, or you have construction dust, it's going to build up on the blinds. Chances are you're going to be cleaning those blinds. If your person uses a cleaner and they stain the white threads or the white strings on the blinds, you're going to be taking those blinds to a professional cleaner or your ultrasonic tank, and you're going to be cleaning those blinds. You're lowering your liability. Now, because you're charging for that lower liability, you're increasing your profitability. So your risk comes down, your profits go up, and you're getting that as part of the scope. So now you can go back and say, well, whatever dust was there was dust from the job or was pre-existing dust. It's not dust from the job. Just a simple task like removing blinds, and I see it on every job, blinds aren't removed. 3 blinds in one room, $100 you can pick up without doing anything different while you increase the quality of your job. Now, every line item, if you understand this, then it's going to make more sense here. Every line item has labor, materials, and equipment. There's an internal profit and overhead and profit that's built into this. So when we look at it, most of the time, you'd say, hey, materials and labor are real costs. Equipment's sometimes a real cost. It may fall above or below the line. Like if you own a skill saw or a table saw and the line item has that factored in, yeah, that table saw may be paid off, it may not be. That might come down to the profit line, or that might have to get built back into some of those fixed overhead costs or variable overhead costs that your business is running. So it might be above or below the line within a line item. I don't really worry about it. It doesn't really matter to me. In this case, I'm just going to say 60% of our line item is costs. There's an internal profit built into every line item, and then you tag on your overhead and profit. I'm going to say that we're going to have a 40% target. So that profit has to be 40%, and I have 60% for costs. If I miss a line item, I don't charge for it. Not only do I lose the profit, that cost disappears it has to be eroded into my other profits. That 40% profit, so on $1, I'd lose 40 cents. For every dollar I don't charge, I lose 40 cents of profit. But I still have to take 60 cents out of my existing business. That is a killer. If you don't have high margins, this is on a 40% margin. If you're running 30% or 25% margins, every dollar you forget to charge or that gets scrubbed, you lose 25 cents or 30 cents, and then 70 cents has to go out of the remaining profit. That's what will kill your business faster than anything. And I'm going to show it to you in a little broken down into line item, because at the beginning I said you got to focus on line items, then you focus on jobs, then you focus on the entire month, and then the year. And here's how it builds up. Let's say we're just going to paint some baseboard and install it. And I'm just going to use a couple feet just for an example here. To paint the baseboard, I've got a $10 charge out. I've got a $2 charge out to install it. The numbers say I'm going to be charging out $12. What if I forget to charge my install baseboard? What do I lose here? Well, I lose the charge out. But I'm not painting baseboard and not putting it on the job, so I'm still doing the work. That means my price just dropped from $12 to $10. Now I have to go in and I have to eat that profit. I don't get to charge that profit out. So I went from $3.50 to $3. Right here, my profit is now dropping. Now, it gets worse because I still have a cost built into my price. In here, this has to be accounted for. And in order for me to account for it, I have to drop another $1.50 out of my profit. I lost 57% of my profit here. I went from $3.50 to $1.50. I hit low margin really quick. And what most contractors don't recognize is this happens on scrubs. Hey, I need you to take these line items off. All right, I'll take it off. Are you supposed to take it off? Are you justified in leaving it on your job? And can you defend it? Because there's more money in defending those line items than it is just scrubbing them off, because you're bringing your company into a lower margin environment. When we scale this up and you put this into a job, Here's what it looks like when you got different jobs that you're working with. Let's say you do a $10,000 job and you have $6,000 in costs and $4,000 in profits. Now, those are gross profits, not nets. But what happens if someone comes in and says, hey, you know what? We're going to take off $1,000 off this job. You just dropped $1,000 of your profit. Now, if your job was running 40% and you had a 30% overhead, you went from making money to breaking even on this one job. What if you left $1,000 of charges off your scope and you forgot to charge for them? Or you didn't charge for them because you started to get into the groove where you don't charge for certain items. You can go from a 33% profitability to a 45% profitability in just one estimate. Now, what we found is on almost every estimate, project managers can find 5 to 10% without even really trying. If you get really aggressive, you can find 15 to 20%. You know where all that money goes? To the bottom line. It absolutely flows to the bottom line. And if you take this and you scale this up one more time to a business, now, if you're a small business, this is probably your entire business. If you're a larger business, this is one project manager. This is what it would do to your business. If you had a 10% profit because that's all you could charge, you'd make 200 grand. But if you could find 10% more money sitting on a job, 5%, 10%, it's all bottom line dollars. And those companies that are getting scrubbed by the programs are down to near zero. To be honest, I've looked at financials of companies that people have shared with me. Their EBITDA number before amortization, interest, and tax is about 6%. EBITDA will chew up about 4% of that. They basically are making 1%, give or take, up or down, and are just churning money. You have to be making profit to be able to pull the EBITDA. So if we had a 20% EBITDA number, that would only net out somewhere around 16 or 14%, depending where you live. So just it's a range. So it's not a full 20. But if that's a net profit 20, that means that number had to be 26, 27, 28% for you to net out 20. That's a big deal. And that's actually an impressive way to look at your scorecards. I keep project managers around that are in those high margins. Just looking here. Nope, we're good. No more questions on there. So where does this come from? It comes from entrenched norms. And I apologize, guys, we're a little over here, but we're going to be wrapping up in about 10 slides. So if you have to go understand with the delays that we had, we're just a little bit behind here. But entrenched norms are where we're coming in. Insurer A will tell you can't charge for certain things. You can't charge for emergency service callouts. Then you go to insurer B, and they say, you know what? You can charge callouts, but we don't really like it. But we also don't want you to charge us for overtime. What happens is project managers get beat down and they get into these entrenched norms. And what happens is if I can't charge it here, it's something that we're not allowed to do. So I don't charge it to the other 9 companies. And you'll see that internally you start to knock it down. The only way to recover that is to have a peer review within a company. A peer review is basically looking in there and somebody over your shoulder saying, you can charge for that because the program doesn't say you can't. And what happens is when you get 2 people together, they will act and execute on the job much more efficient. It's funny, I'm not an ex-military guy, but the same principles apply in being a sniper. When I was in law enforcement snipers and military snipers follow the same doctrine. 2 people will make a decision, a tougher decision than 1 person by themselves. You'll see that in here that if you have a peer review, profits go up. 2 things happen. 1, you make tougher decisions as a team. It's easier to make the decision. Usually that peer is someone senior in the company, so they're okay making a harder decision. The second thing that happens, you get the second set of eyes. They're looking for those misses, which are data entry errors. You're missing for things that were data entry errors, and the gains to a company is dramatic. It's a major ramp up in profitability. The other thing is that a lot of companies run false profits. So on equipment, we don't ever put a charge on it. So you get 100% margin on equipment, even though there's cost to storing it and everything. In a company, if you put a 30 or 40% burden on equipment, it allows people to not psychologically think that the company is generating 100% margin on equipment. So when they get to a job that says it's a 70% gross profit, they're like, wow, that's a lot. And maybe I can charge less. No, there's a bunch of fake things that have not been accounted for, or there's a bunch of fake profit in there. We have costs on equipment. We have to service it. We have to replace it. We have to amortize it. That has to be built in as a cost. What is the cost of that equipment? Should be somewhere around 30, 35%, but whatever your accounting team figures it out at should be accounted for. That will lower your margins, which means that the project managers that etch their way up the margin ladder are actually doing it, and the company's accounting for those burden costs, the EBITDA costs, which is where they come out of, is basically your equipment and your vehicles. You have to account for that. Then you get into program work, and you get the program agreement says you can't charge for that. So that's the company A, company B scenario. Then you get the adjuster that says, I don't pay for this and I don't pay for that. And again, that's another layer of resistance that your people are going to run into. And you see that attrition start to take a effect on your profitability. If you work with one company and that project manager started at 50%, if you track it, you probably see that they go from a 50% down to like a 40, where everyone's good with that number. You may not be good with that profitability number. You have to look at that. And that's where you're going to be starting to manage that. Then you look at unit pricing. Very few people show credits. If you want me to take off emergency service call out, I will add it, I will credit it, and I will show you the savings you get. And I'm going to put it on the statement at the cover page saying everything that you did on this job that you got for free. So if we have program agreements say no emergency service call out, no overtime for project managers, whatever the deal is, I'm going to show those deductions and say, based on our program rules, you save $2,500. Now, when you come back and you ask for another savings, I'm going to tell you, well, we already gave you $2,500 based on what we're dealing with, which is 20% of our profit or 20% of our charge out. I'm not giving you any more on that price. I can't afford to. I gave you $2,500 based on the agreement. What we don't do, we never show that to the customer. So I'm going to come in here, guys, and I'm going to push this down. This is actually a basis for looking at how you build your estimating processes. It's also the basis of how you do your large loss. It's basically how you transfer your business from a reactive business to a proactive business. When you make that switch to a proactive business, your EBITDA goes up, your frustrations among staff go down, and the ability for your company to avoid long legal battles or getting your bills scrubbed goes dramatically up. And you'll see in Canada, like in Canada, Nelson confirmed it, is we have a high program work. You have a hard time turning work away when someone's holding $1 million of your revenue on their lap. And if you want that $1 million, you're going to have to play by the program rules. In the US, where you guys have a lot more freedom and flexibility, and a lot of companies run no program work or very little program work, you then have the ability to turn work away that is deemed not profitable up before you even take it on. That is a major advantage for you guys in the States, and I'll show you why. This is how most businesses have structured their company. We do a little bit of administrative and contract work at the beginning. We talk a little bit about pricing, but not necessarily. We just assume that everyone's going to be good with our price. We really go ahead, execute on the work. We might document it, send in our paperwork. And then at the very end, we fight to try to get paid. And we go through reviews and arguments. If you change the model and you say, you know what, we're going to have that conversation up front. We're going to have our contracts in place. We're going to tell you what we're going to charge you. We're going to negotiate that all up front. When we go to do the job, it's in a contract. We have agreement on it. We know what you're willing to pay for. We know what you're not willing to pay for. When we get to the end, the deal's the deal. Just pay the bill. Very few restorers do that because we race into jobs because we have to start restoring. You can start stabilizing a job and negotiate the job and make sure everyone's good with the terms, explain your paperwork. If someone's not, so if the adjuster says not a chance of paying you, walk away. Why incur that battle unless you are willing to go down that path? Why incur that battle and lose that revenue up front? So this means that you got to front load the job. But if you build it as part of your process and you actually structure your company for that, you have almost little resistance at the end. I did this. I made this big change in our business. We went through a couple of years of struggle, and I'm going to show you that at the end here. But what we did is we went through a couple of years of struggle, and we put in a bunch of processes because this was the things that we were told were missing in our business, when we made these changes, we had a dramatic impact. And what it was is it just simply meant everything we did in the business was thought out. We front loaded the scope, we front loaded the mitigation response, we front loaded how we estimated a job. We would even get into the business of dealing with the adjuster and giving them the budget ballpark at the beginning, maybe a little high and coming in a little lower than that. And we were getting paid really quick. So we totally transformed our business in about 2 years once we figured out that it was about processes. And now your map would look like this. Heavy foundation is on administrative and planning, bigger focus on negotiating those terms and making sure we know who's paying and when. And then we can get in there, execute, do the job. That's table stakes. You're just showing up and spend very little time getting your check. And if you have all those factors completed, that number D or that letter D is easy to do because you can turn stuff over to your lawyer quickly because your contract should wrap up the job at the end. We have agreement here. You have to pay me in this term. You don't pay me. We just affect the legal actions and we go down those loops. It's a process. It's not every job's like a brand new experience for us. So what does this front loading a job look like in real life? And this is something that I started when I started my career. I was Canada's only independent Xactimate trainer for about 7 years, meaning I worked for myself. I didn't work for a company. I didn't service the insurance carriers. I didn't service the contractors. I literally was out there as a sole proprietor training people on how to be profitable. I trained Xactimate, and actually the problem that I ran into is when Xactimate told me they couldn't tell me how to be profitable, I built a whole bunch of training for myself and then for my peers on how to be profitable with Xactimate because that was the system that was mandated by all these programs. And so we had to figure out how to be profitable there. And what we did is we started to look at the scope of work. When I started my career, I started as an adjuster and I worked with 2 senior adjusters that were amazing. And the biggest lesson I got from them was figure out the scope of work and then figure out the price. Don't combine the two. And nowadays the scope is the price and people don't like the price. They change your scope. Figure out the scope, deal with the price. And I'll tell you, this is something that we've applied. And when I got to Encircle in 2016, we started building. This is what a scope sheet will look like. And I'm going to take you on a little hands-on tour here of how to scope a job in the field. The biggest thing you need to do is make sure you capture all the line items. Now, what we found is if you can capture all those line items, the difference in profitability across the industry is about 5% if you're just slugging away normally. You're enough to be in business, but not enough to be turning the profits you want. If you pick up those line items that are missing and you still are stuck inside those rules, if you can get the entire scope of work, you should be in that 10 to 15% EBITDA space because you're leaving about 10% of the revenue on the table. Now, for some companies that are really efficient, that actually will then grow. That you'll be able to pick up that 10 or 15%, and you'll be able to pick up a few percentage points on cost, and you're going to get your business in that 15 to 20% EBITDA range, which should put you in that 10 to 12% or 15% net. We use these scope sheets because what it does is it allows the insurance adjuster and the contractor to speak the same language. And once they can speak the same language and there's no numbers attached to it, we can get back to talking about scope of work. Then what we did is we built this so that you can import, not now I say import, you have to manually do it because of the way Exact works. So we can take the Encircle scope sheet and quickly import it into Xactimate. And we can do it at about 70% of the time savings. So you're picking up more revenue, we're reducing our non-billables, and we're increasing our charge outs. It's a win-win. We can actually have our non-billables do more with less. And that's why we developed these scope sheets. Now, it came back that I used to run my laptop on site to estimate, but that wasn't working easy for most contractors. Most contractors, it's just too hard and too time consuming to do it. So now we have it where you can run the entire scope on your phone. And I'm going to flip this over and do a screen share here. And while I do this, I'll break this down. If you guys have any questions, put them in there. I'll stick around and answer those all after here at the end. And then once I'm done this, we have 2 more slides. And I'm going to show you what my company did and how we put these in and how the change that it made for our business. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this room. So for those of you who haven't seen Encircle, this is our background. We take photos left to right, slightly overlapping. Again, you have to be able to tell that visual story to a customer. Then what we want to do is we want to come in here, and this is my Samsung S9, and I'm going to just create a scoping document. So what we did is we took all of the Xactimate line items for mitigation and all the related areas. So that in mitigation is about 250 line items. We then took it and put about 700 line items that you could use in this scope sheet. And we made it with a system called progressive disclosure. That means that you don't have to see them all. You don't have to flip through 20 pages of scoping tools to see what you're doing. What we're going to do is we're just going to come in here and create the kitchen. And the way progressive disclosure works is unless you need to look at it, you don't have to focus on it at all. So we start off with the 3 principles of estimating. There's the orders of operation, how a job will function. So testing, PPE, site protection, that's the orders of operation, extraction, biowash. Then we get into top-down estimating or outside-in. Really, other than that, that's the 3 principles that you're going to follow, or the 3 methodologies of estimating you're going to follow. And so as you work through a job, you're going to be in one of those systems of estimating. So in here, if we came in and said we're going to extract this floor, we have progressive disclosure. Is it not category 2 and not category 3? Then we only focus on category 1. The sink overflows here, we tap on that, and it gives us all of our regular hours and our after hours. So all we have to do is say, yeah, extract from a hard surface. It's in more plain English or better plain English when we put this together. My English is still a little rough, but we're putting this in, and we got our English for our technicians. Just the way you look at it is the way you're going to put it in. It's water extraction from a hard surface. The unit of measurement for Xactimate and for the scope. And then we have our scope, our Xactimate line item code. When we add this in, all the actions, replace, remove, and replace, all those you can add in. But nice thing about water, you don't even have to touch it. All you have to do is come in here, and you can either type in floor, hit F, or put in the square footage, or you could use the variables. Now, most of the technicians don't have the variables known, so you can teach that to them, or you could just say, hey, you know what, just put the number. I don't even care. As long as I get the information in, that's all that matters. And then what we do is we can work our way through, and this tool allows technicians to put some context to it. Those contexts, that verbal context, will then flow over and be our supporting documents. Extracted water from the vinyl floor. Voice to text is great because as long as they can communicate it, and even if it's got punctuality or spelling errors, as long as it's communicated, I can then apply that and use it. And so what we did is we built these scope sheets so that we can go through and work through a job and have people think about the job in the way that you should attack it, or the most common way you would attack a job. So we click on contents. Are you moving out and resetting this room? Well, that's the furniture and the boxes from the room that we're moving out and resetting. Are you moving those? Yep, this is a large room. We add that in. One room. If they leave it blank, I don't care. Evaluate and inventory and pack. What this does is include some supervision time in there, includes the material for the packing paper and the box, somewhere around $12 or $13 a box. It's a great charge. If you had 10 of these here, that'd be $120 that you'd add to that estimate. And there's no reason to put any additional information. If you need additional packing supplies, it's right there. And what this does is this allows you to normalize your estimate. We get in and tearing out and detaching materials. Is there insulation? And it's walking people through all the things that you can charge for. Drapes and blinds. Well, geez, you know what? That's there. And we could take out those blinds, and there's 3 of them here. There's one here, one here. If they're picking this up, they're picking up the revenue that you're typically leaving on the table. Things like door stops. You cut drywall at 2 feet, you detach the spring door stop, you put it back on the sill plate. Well, you could detach and reset that spring-mounted door stop. That's an $8 charge just to take it off, put it back on, and then you're going to remove and replace it when you go to actually put the new door spring on top of the finished drywall. You're going to put a brand new one in, so you're going to replace that with a new one, but you can remove this one. I don't even care if I get the remove and replace on the new one. I just want to be able to get the charge here, so I'm protecting my walls. My staff are doing it, so it becomes part of that scope of work. and we can agree. I can talk to an adjuster, say, do you want the doorstop in there so we protect the wall? Yeah, just put it back if you can. Perfect. I'll add that to the scope. That's how the conversations should happen. Now, it doesn't always happen, and you don't always have carriers with those rules. But more often than not, if you can explain why you took the doorstop off and put it back on, it's just justifying your charges. Someone says, I don't pay for it. Well, you pay for the scope of work. So how do you want us to handle the doors in the future? Do you want us to detach the door? That's a $14 charge or a $16 charge. I don't care how you want me to do the job, but I am getting paid for the scope of work I'm doing. And then what we did is we go through and we get into the kitchen and baths area, the electrical items, closet rods and shelves. Those are usually left off. But if you get into the cabinets and shelves, how many people forget the appliances? So I sat in a review desk for about 1,000 files. And in there, almost all the time, the appliances were moved and no one charged for it. It's $100, $130 just to take these appliances out. Almost charges that almost never get charged through. So what you're doing is you're coming up with this scoping sheet, and you can come in and add equipment in. The equipment's interesting because we made sure that when you do a power distribution box, you get the temporary cable. So the extension cord used to be in water. It got moved, and then what we did is we went and found it, and we put it back together, because if I put a power box or spider box in there and the power has to go to a different area, if I run an extension cord, I need that generate temporary repair. I need the 240 cord to move the power. So I'm going to charge it out. If I do that, I double my profitability just on that power box. This is a $40 charge for the power box, another $40 for the cable. Most of the time, the cable is missing. Actually, almost all the time, we never see the cable charged for. Then what we do is we get into air movers. So you have the air movers, and what we did is we broke it up. Everyone has air movers, so we know that you're going to put those on the job. What we don't know most people have is air mover add-ons. Now, the ROI on an add-on is anywhere between 5 and 8 days. So if you need a 48-inch snout adapter, that's about a $17 a day charge. That thing costs about $70. Once it's paid off and you're using your air mover to blow air into the walls, you're picking up those charges, you're picking up that revenue. You're increasing the profitability on that air mover by about 50%. That is a 33% increase in profitability on your bottom line, just on that one item. So if you have a lot of those accessories that are helping you dry the building faster, you're able to charge and pick up those additional margins. Now, it goes through, there's a bunch of equipment. I'm not going to walk you through all that, but what I wanted to do is show you how easy this is, that when you basically come in and you want to take the scope from one room, you duplicate it, and you say, you know what, this is the kitchen. I'm going to do a hallway very much the same way. You can modify this. And then you can come in and you can edit these and you can adjust what you need. So let's say that in this case, we have no kitchens and bath stuffs. We can just go and edit it and remove those off and be like, you know what? We don't care about the kitchens and baths. Just delete that whole section. They're gone, save it, and the rest of it's good. And we'll just leave it in place. Now, what's awesome about this is once you hit save, instantly it's back at the office. Because what you're getting judged on, whether you like it or not, you're getting judged on cycle time and how fast you can get stuff in. Now you can get a highly accurate scope in really quick, and your estimating team can start working on it. So the way it works now is they basically come into the job, they open up an estimate or scope, and they can start working on that scope of work right now. The way we built this is that all these codes are basically codes that they can run from. So in here, number 18, water extraction from a hard surface. Number 18, water extraction from a hard surface. So if we're going in, I'm just going to pull up a scope that has a few more line items on it. In here, we can just run this against our sheet. Now, what we did is we built a macro set, because the biggest challenge is when you play with macros is if you have a macro set, it's really customized to the individual. So what we decided to do is make it so it was really easy for everyone who wants to write a job, that you could have an admin person or a very low-level trained estimator in, and they can actually write the job with you. I'm just going to pull up the exact here. And there we go. So in here, when you run in with the scope sheet, everything that we built is macro based. So we basically came in here and said, well, if we have macro 18, we have these macros that are assigned. So now you go H2O is the macro set and 018 is the macro. There's all my estimating items for that. And all I'm doing is looking for the hard surface or the code. I click and highlight all of them. I delete what I don't need off. I make sure the variable matches the quantity. And then I go in and I add the next one. And I have no work that I need to do in writing the estimate, because if it was done by someone qualified in the field or someone that picked up the charges, all I'm doing is a data entry. Then my estimators back in the office can then figure out what else we should charge for and how easy it is to knock that out. So really what we're doing is we're just going in and making sure we account for all the line items that are being charged. It's a really easy system, but what the goal is that now you can start talking about scope of work and building that in and capturing that revenue that would normally be left on the table. I'm going to wrap up here, guys. I'm going to get going and we'll finish this part up. But the other opportunity, and Tim and I were talking about this, is that are you maximizing the effect of your sub-trades? So sub-trades work, and I did some consulting early for sub-trades when I ran my consulting business. And what I found is most of them spend about 3.5 days working on the job, and then they spend a day and a half doing the business stuff, estimating jobs, going and seeing job sites. So what I factored in is that they have to make in 3.5 days, $1,500 or $2,000 a week. Well, if you give them $2,000 a week, but you pay it over 5 days and you keep giving them work, it works out to a really good hourly rate for you guys. So if you take a 40-hour work week and you say that their charge out rate is $50 an hour to get them the $2,000 that they need, and I'm okay with that, and I'm charging $60 or $70 plus overhead and profit, I can turn around and start handing these contractors the invoicing that they need. I say, I'll give you the $2,000 for the week. I'm going to charge you less per hour. And all you need to do is you don't have to tell them what you're doing. They just look at their bank account and they realize how much money they have. And so what you try to figure out is, hey, how often are you out estimating jobs? Oh, I'm out there once a week, or I spend about 2 hours a day. You break it down and you factor in what sub-trades are doing, because once you get to know how they're working, you can start understanding how much do you have to pay them. Now, the other thing is when you get into cabinets, there's some tricks about cabinets is you have defined definitions of cabinets that almost no one else will follow, and that's the Xactimate definitions. What's a custom melamine cabinet versus a high-end cabinet? Read those definitions, take it to your cabinet people and say, if we're doing work and we are doing this type of work, I need you to use this terminology on your paperwork. It's a high-end custom cabinet. The reason why is if you get the pricing set up right and your price list works, you should be able to then go and use the same terminology and put it in as line items and make that extra margin within the line items. There's enough line items within cabinets to allow you to be profitable. What we typically don't do is what makes a cabinet custom could be the shape of the boxes. It could be the materials or the build. If they come in and use the custom line items, you're getting about a 40% or a 30% bump in line item profitability. If the cabinet maker uses the same language as your Xactimate estimate, it makes it really easy for the insurance company to approve it. But it's when it falls outside of those parameters, it becomes tough. When you're dealing with tile guys or drywallers, making sure you capture the mortar bed and all the line items that go with some of that specialty trade work. As restorers, we're expected to know how everything functions within a building. You're expected to be at that level of capacity, but very few are. So make sure you work with the sub-trades to say, hey, like, did I capture everything in your workflow? And it's a couple quick conversations and you'll be able to pick that up with them. Really big on understanding when you're doing rebuild and you're dealing with the sub-trades like a tile guy, knowing what their costs are. I like to sit down and ask them where they buy their materials, because what you'll find is a lot of them would prefer you to buy the materials and them to do the install. And on a lot of the sub-trades that you might hire, the installer might just literally be the laborer who's sub-traded to a general flooring contractor. If you want to circumvent that, you could find your own installers and then you set up your own purchasing of the materials. And it's not typically that hard. the US is more famous for having kitchen and bath centers than in Canada. We don't typically have showrooms for that. Kitchen, bath, flooring, counters. The amount of money and margin in that when you upgrade people is absolutely astronomical. What you can get out of a job, and then you use as a lead supply if you're working with TPAs to be able to get those upgrades in those kitchens. I'm going to take you on to this. So this is what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how this impacted our numbers. So this is 2012 to 2016. It's a little grainy, but I'll walk you through it. In that time, we were running a 5% net right here. It was a 5% net in 2012 when I started with the company and I took it over. We were doing that year. I was a consultant for them, and we went from a 5% net to a 10.5 EBITDA. So that EBITDA to net was a 5% difference. So if you thought you were making money, you weren't making as much money by the time it all filtered out, and we got to a 5.2% net earnings. The next year I had to even out because we had a consultant fee that was being paid out. But we went from a 5.2 EBITDA to an 11.47 EBITDA. And you feel like you're on top of the world when you're doing that. The problem that ran into it is the next year we lost our number one client. Now, we were a program work client. We literally lost our number one client. There was a sexual harassment suit that went through, and that decimated our business. We lost $1 million of high margin work. And what you'd see is that we went down and we had a negative loss here. We actually went down to a 10% loss. But if you looked at our before, it only looked bad. It was like 7.5. The losses don't hit as hard below the line because you're already bleeding money. You're not paying taxes. The difference is that they rolled some of my stuff over into the next year. So we broke even the following year. And the following year, my partner died. He died. He had no life insurance. And when he died and passed away, what you see is that all of a sudden that 0% profitability turned into a negative 10% after in our net earnings. Now, at that point, we were built to do $3 to $4 million. So we started to cut back on staff. And then we decided to put all these business practices of front loading the job. So we kept taking on work and we were turning away work. So what we did, we started taking only the work we wanted to do. And what happened in 2016, there's another asterisk there. We did do some CAT work, but we had municipality work coming in at very high margin. And literally what we did is we ran a 32% number in our EBITDA, and we ran a 24% net. Now that actually changed because what we did is we actually added $220,000 that was tied up in legal that ran into the next year. We did on $2.9 million of sales, $900,000 of net profit. And what that was is that was taking jobs and watching every dollar on every job and making sure that what we did is we went and focused. Are we going to make money on this job? Do we make money on this task? Because if you just start blending it all together and trying to figure out at the end of the month, everything focuses from the tasks inside an estimate. Then we went in and we basically pushed it through. That was our year where we actually put all these systems in place. We went proactive. We put Encircle in place. I became a huge promoter of Encircle at that point because it literally changed the way that our business flowed. And then with my partner passing away, his wife didn't want the business. I didn't live in town. I was 1,600 miles from where the business was located. We ended up shutting it down. But that business was the model that we put in place, and it all was based around estimating. Now, if I were to go back today and I were to do the same thing, the two things I would have changed is I would have worked with Tim, because what I was doing in my business was struggling to get those sales to be able to pick and choose what work I wanted to do. We didn't always have that choice. But if I had that choice, then I would be focused on how my profitability was set. And then I would pick and choose and build my volume up to where I was happy, where we were turning junk work away, or we weren't scared to turn work away. And then you can get your operations in alignment and you can get the technicals. Most restorers are good on the technicals, but the estimating and the sales, if you get those two in sync, you can get yourself a really good net profit. I'm not here to brag on it. Listen, numbers can go the other way very quickly. It doesn't take a lot for you to go from a high net profit to a low net profit. COVID put a lot of businesses out and under, or at least really tanked their books for them. Stuff happens. But in this case, this was just us really refining some stuff, and we got some big wins. We picked up 2 good storms in our area, and it really generated some profits. But that only came as a result of putting all the other stuff I talked about into place. And I never shared these numbers with anyone, so you guys got to see it. But that's the actual results of taking a business and implementing these changes into it. It will turn your business around. And if you start getting your sales lined up with what Tim's doing, all of a sudden you now have that business really focused on generating that top line revenue, bringing those sales in, and making sure your bottom line revenue matches. And if you do that and you build yourself to the capacity that your business is sized for, you will be very profitable. Right there, we were sized to do $4 million that year. We didn't have to add resources. We actually reduced some resources to hit that number. If we would have got $4 million in revenue in, I'm pretty sure our net would have went up to about 34, 35 because we had so much efficiency built into the business. And with that, that's how I'm going to end this here, guys. Thanks for sticking with us for a little bit of the overrun time. And if you guys got questions, don't feel free to put it in there, and I'll answer those away.
Well, I'm going to thank you very much, Kris. I want to just spend a couple of minutes. And Fred, I don't know if you can see this or not, but I can't get. Kris, if you could relinquish the screen share.
Yeah, you know what? I thought I turned it. If I didn't turn it. On my side, it's showing that I'm done.
Okay. Let's see. Disable screen. Okay.
And the only thing that's maybe up is.
Well.
Now it should be.
Okay, great. Now I can. So, guys, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes. First of all, Kris, thank you so much. This is a huge, huge topic, and you presented a tremendous amount of information. I appreciate you sticking around to finish it because I think the last bit of it was really, really the important part to show people, how much money there is potentially to be made in this business. And we spend so much time complaining about how difficult it is to work with the insurance industry. But the fact of the matter is, real entrepreneurs have to look at what do we need to do to make a profit based on the market realities that we're faced in. And so I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes to talk about leveling up your restoration business, which is something that we often get asked to help people do. And so I think that we get so busy facing reality that we stop dreaming, right? So we're so focused on here's where we are and just trying to survive sometimes the insanity of running a really hectic business that we stop thinking about what is it that we actually want to do. There's the old fabled, I'm going to do my work from the beach, or maybe I want to run a really fast growing company. I spoke to a gentleman this morning. His goal is to be an $80 million company. That's 1%, top 1% of restorers. Family vacation, putting kids through school, having lots of dough in the bank. Maybe it's your dream house. All those things, sometimes we simply stop dreaming about. And I think that's really, really important because if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, right? And we all in this industry, all of you guys, all you restorers work incredibly hard and probably make a decent living already. But oftentimes we've gotten trapped and we've actually put the golden handcuffs on ourselves. And a good test for this is, if you were going to spend 6 months overseas somewhere, could you basically, with no phone conversation, just reports coming back and forth, could you stay away for 6 months and come back to a humming, thriving business that was still generating profit? If you can't, then obviously you're not to that point yet, and it might be something that you really want to aspire to. The other thing that we see, and Kris just did a perfect example of this, are you really maximizing net profit potential? And for those of you owners that are on the call, really, you're in this business to create wealth. Now, what you do with the wealth is, of course, totally up to you. It could be philanthropic work. It may be generational wealth for your family. It may be you want a Lamborghini. Maybe you want to work on getting rid of Lamborghinis and make bicycles the mode of transport. Whatever it is, this is really the question. And one of the things that I think is a great model to understand this is Seth Godin, who's a marketing guru and genius, quite frankly. I wrote this book called The Dip. You can Google it and get a lot of information on it. But what it really comes down to is that when businesses start, they typically have a positive growth curve. Part of it's being new. the enthusiasm of the owner. The owner is doing a lot of the marketing and operations, so he's doing a very high level of customer service and sales activity. But he's going to hit a point where the business is going to go through a dip. And this is all of a sudden, all of the costs and all of the challenges and all of the burdens that everybody else who's been in business for a while takes for granted and understands is going to hit them. And you have to find a way to push through the dip. And if you don't, you typically fall off the cliff, or in some cases, you never really get going. And both of those end up in failure. So the kind of material that we're presenting today is really about how to get through the dip. And what you don't want to do is quit right before you come out of the dip, okay? Because when you come out of the dip, of course, now you're headed toward mastery and all the good things that come. It's interesting to me, the kind of profit numbers that Kris was talking about. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday talking about his company with a 28% net profit. 28%, 31%, you don't hear those numbers typically when you talk to restorers. You hear 5%, 10%. And when you look at the EBITDA, now you're really talking about 2%, 6%. Really, in a lot of cases, you'd be better off doing something else, okay, if those are the kind of margin numbers that you're earning. So why do we fail to grow past the dip? You know, if you knew what to do to get past the dip, you'd probably be doing it. In fact, many of you are probably doing it. But one of my dear friends, Bob Bonwell, used to like to say, you can't outperform your knowledge. And I think that's true. And I also think that many restorers try a lot of different initiatives. They try a lot of different things, and they get frustrated, maybe even pissed off a little bit that they haven't broken through to that next level. And that's understandable, because if you don't know what the problem is specifically to get you to that next level, then you work on all kinds of different things. But if you're not working on the right things, then it can be a real waste of time, energy, and money. And I have been there myself more times than I'd like to admit. So the big question is really, what's standing in the way of getting what you really, really want from your business? And would a roadmap be helpful to really know these are the things that I need to work on? These are the things that are holding me back. And this is really something that I want to just talk about, and this is the last slide to talk about it. But it's really something that we call a pre-launch status check. If you're getting ready to launch your business, right, and grow your business, then having a comprehensive diagnostic as a starting point that really helps you understand what's in the way of that, and is formatted so that you have a detailed roadmap. This is step-by-step what you need to do. These are the places where you have a gap between what you're doing and best practices. And then that report becomes, okay, this is the way I'm going to get to that next level that I'm trying to get to. And once you have the report, you can use the report and do it yourself. You can engage with us. You can engage with somebody else. But now you have the data that you really need. So let me see if this will work. I'm going to post this. Oops. Hey, Fred, can we, I don't know if we've got the call to action in there, but if we don't, we'll be sending you guys out an email so that you can click to have a conversation about your business. No high pressure sales stuff, just learning and sharing about your business and seeing if we think we can be of help in some way. Also, Kris is going to offer you some goodies, compliments of Encircle, and we really very much appreciate that. We'll send that out in the follow-up email also. And I don't want to make a plug for Encircle, not just because they allowed Kris to come down and spend a couple of hours of his time talking to you, but every client that I have recommended Encircle to, and there's been many of them over the years, has said, oh my gosh, how on earth did we not use this tool before? The amount of internal communication, the ability to justify and defend your invoice, to tell the story of the loss, and there's some new tools coming. I cannot recommend strongly enough that if you guys are not familiar with Encircle, reach out to them, get a demo, see what it can do. It's a very, very affordable product. Again, I feel like I'm a cheerleader for Encircle, but I really do believe in the product. Okay, so now we did get that call to action up. So if you want to find out more about this pre-launch status check, you click there. It'll take you to a landing page, and you can schedule a time to speak with us if you'd like to do that. So let's see, Kris, do we have any additional questions?
Yeah, you know what? So there was one question is that got answered we built that scoping tool in Encircle, and it's in the third version, but the last version of its current status, and then it'll be rolled into a smarter tool in the future. And then as for, is this a standalone system or part of a CRM like NextGear? Actually, when I was with the franchise that we were running the NextGear product, and what was different, and so I'll take the Encircle badge off for a second and put the Restore one on. We had tools that were based on getting a lot of information from the field to run. And what we ended up having is that we didn't get the information from our field. We were chasing paperwork. We spent a ton of time chasing paperwork. And so the data I was looking at, now I never lived in the city where I ran my business, so I was always remote. I couldn't get my hands on the data quick enough to determine if the decisions that were being made within the business were proper and were the way that I wanted them. When we put Encircle in 2015, and you saw our numbers, we broke even before EBITDA, and then we lost money. And I'll tell you, if the dip, Tim, that you're talking about, Tim and I didn't prepare that part, but I'll tell you, that dip, that was where I felt like I was so embarrassed that when we got kicked off the insurance companies thing, that we lost money that year when we were on a projection to go from we had a 16% projection to get to 18. That should have been a $300,000 plus year on that year, and we were down $200,000. I was embarrassed beyond belief, and it wasn't until I sat with an older Restore, and he said, "Well, you think every year is a winner for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually, I did. That's exactly what I thought. I thought every year I was going to make money." He goes, "No." He's like, "In 30 years," he goes, "we had 5 that we didn't do well in." He goes, "But you hope that the other years make some big differences for you." That dip is sort of where our business went through, and we went through it not necessarily on trying to get to that mastery level, but I'll tell you, running a business as an owner where your skin's in the game versus a manager where you're not is a major difference. So there was that learning curve that I went through. If I would have pulled the pin, and I wanted to so bad in 2015, when my partner passed away, if his life insurance was there, I would have pulled the pin, to be honest with you, because that's where I was mentally done. It was his business. I came in, but that dip was where we said, "Hey, we're going to figure this out. We're going to get ourselves cleaned back up." And it paid off. And we would have done well the next year anyway, had we not had those storms come in. But we would have been probably 10%. We would have had the volume. That's what we were lacking. We couldn't get volume, but we definitely had margin. So we went from a 33% gross profit to a 52. And so that 52% gross profit was what I needed and what I was running. And every job that we ran was between 48 and 54. When we got to that 52% gross profit, that was, I didn't care. I would take on more volume. I could take on less. We would have been able to make money anywhere and restrict ourselves from jobs that whole time. And that's, to be honest, that's the holy grail for most restorers, is taking the jobs that you can actually do and make money and enjoy doing. I hated 2015 when I took every job and I knew there was jobs I didn't want to take and I wasn't going to make money. That was the dip for us. So that is absolutely a true statement. And yeah, it's if your business is going through it, it sucks, but there's people in the industry. We did a talk 2 years ago, Jacqueline Carpenter and myself, that we basically said, let's roll back our books. She's in San Francisco. I was in Northern Alberta. Our curves looked the same. And what was interesting is people were blown away that no one's ever talked about losing money in presentations on stage. We both said, hey, listen, we did it and we recovered. Thank you. But it happens. So if you're in that boat where you've had some rough years, and give me a call. You guys will have my contact information. You need a shoulder to cry on. It happens. It sucks, but there's ways out of it. And finding good sales and good volume. Tim's an expert with that. I love working with him on there. And then if you guys need some help figuring out your estimating and profitability and your technology, more than happy to help you guys, even if it doesn't result in us doing business with you at Encircle. So thank you. Thank you very much for sticking around, guys.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to sign off now. We'll make a recording available. We'll send you guys all an email with the goodies. Thank you again. Have a great day.